we get focused on a particular image of narcissist, that loud, boastful braggart, or the vain person, and that is not all kinds of narcissists, and it's not all kinds of narcissism, and some people can be extremely quiet. A much clearer understanding and a much easier way of spotting trouble. Most of the writings, most of the books, most of what you read on the internet focuses on the more obvious kinds of narcissism that really apparently we're actually very adept at seeing. Some practical tips on how to spot and handle narcissism across your relationships. A spouse or a partner. What happens if you see it in your parent or a child? How do you spot and handle narcissism in a coworker or a boss? What makes someone extremely narcissistic is that they are afraid to depend on others. When they're feeling sad or scared or lonely or upset in any way, they become dependent on or addicted to feeling special in any number of ways, whether it's like by feeling like the most attractive, good-looking person in the room, or the most misunderstood person in the room, or the most helpful person in the room, or even the most distressed person in the room. All kinds of ways to feel special, which is why you need to understand what I call the tells, the signs that show up even early on, precisely because of the way people who are extremely narcissistic learn to cope, regardless of what form their narcissism takes. So what are these tells? What are these giveaways? Well, when you are invested in feeling special, so much so that you turn away from other ways of seeking comfort, care, support, that also leaves you unable to be open to vulnerable feelings and to share them directly. That is one of the side effects of developing unhealthy narcissism and becoming extremely narcissistic. This discomfort with vulnerability. Again, this fear of depending on others in times of need, or when we have longings for closeness, when we feel overwhelmed, when most of us feel that way if we are capable of securely turning to others, of secure love in our relationships, or even secure connection in our friendships. We can ask them for help, we can share what's going on, we can invite them closer. But if you're afraid of doing that, then you have to find ways to dodge vulnerability. It's the vulnerability dodge that gives extremely narcissistic people away, even if they are quiet. What happens is we all from time to time use these various strategies. It's not the typical that you've heard. If somebody likes to talk about themselves a lot, or they seem to spend too much time in the mirror, or they're loud mouths and they always bring the conversation back to themselves. That's true of some narcissists, and it's not true of all. And so it's not very helpful, especially at the beginning of the relationships, as you've already experienced many times when you start dating someone. In the beginning of the relationship, you might see all kinds of wonderful qualities. I want to repeat what I said earlier. No one generally falls in love with a jerk. The bad parts evolve, they come out over time. The reason that happens, by the way, is because the more time we spend with someone, the more we have to learn to be open to them about our deeper needs and feelings, and that's what becomes challenging for somebody who's extremely narcissistic. So there are these vulnerability dodges. One of the clearest signs is something I call emotion phobia. And people who are extremely narcissistic, they don't like to say I need things. They don't like to say that I'm upset about something. Instead, they might get angry, and they might just shut down. They might just completely shut down. And what I want to say about this tell, or any of the tells I describe in Rethinking Narcissism, is that what they all have in common, even though we all use them from time to time, because we all are capable of handling our insecurity in this way occasionally, with narcissists they tend to use them more frequently and always in some way to feel superior. So again, getting back to emotion phobia, what happens is if somebody's extremely narcissistic, they don't want to come out and they don't want to share that they're feeling vulnerable in this way. They might shut down, they might get angry. But more importantly, if you're in a relationship with them, what you see, even in the subtler forms, even early on, is that they can't stay with feelings that you're having. This might not take the form right away of being completely unempathic. You might even see expressions of concern or something cross their face that shows that they're being affected by what you're saying. But what you also see is that somebody who's extremely narcissistic, or even just subtle unhealthy narcissism, will turn away from feelings that you yourself bring up, like sadness, loneliness, worry, because they don't want to go there. So anything to sort of move away from that conversation, that's an example of emotion phobia. One dead giveaway for somebody being narcissistic. Say you're talking to them about the difficult time you had over the weekend with your kids, where everybody has one of those weekends where everything seems to go wrong and you just feel overwhelmed and feel like you can't do anything right. Or you're talking to your friend about school and you're having trouble and you're feeling really unsure of yourself in a class, and that friend, or maybe in the case of this situation at school, an acquaintance says, "Oh, I don't know what you mean. I don't feel that way." Obviously, that's a way of feeling superior. It's sort of sending the message, it's strange that you would feel that way. I couldn't possibly understand those feelings. And that's a good example of emotion phobia. There's also, with that one, obviously an air of condescension, but it can take much subtler forms. Anyone who's extremely narcissistic will, whether they are quiet, whether they are boastful and loud, maybe they won't be in the beginning of the relationship, whether they consider themselves the best and the most altruistic person you've ever met, they will show those signs, because you cannot avoid normal human feelings of vulnerability without these kinds of predictable signs. One more I want to share, because there's a lot that I go into detail in the book, but one of them that's so common, especially in the workplace, is something I call playing emotional hot potato. You do want to think of this very much like playing hot potato with feelings of insecurity. Again, because extremely narcissistic people don't want to say, "I'm unsure of myself," or "I'm feeling kind of shaky today," or "I don't really know what to do." Very commonly, what they will do instead is say and do things to make you feel those feelings, to sort of undermine your sense of being centered or sure or secure. Almost like they're saying, "I don't want to take this feeling, here, you take it." That is playing emotional hot potatoes. So those are a couple of early warning signs that show up across different kinds of extreme narcissism. And again, what they all have in common is their ways of dodging vulnerability. So what do you do if you see them? What if you see them in a partner? Well, the first thing I want to go over, because it is extremely important, is what I call the 3 stop signs for any relationship, but particularly for romantic relationships, for friendships. Most of the time people are struggling with this in romantic relationships. Before you consider using any of the strategies that I will recommend now, you need to consider these 3 stop signs. The first stop sign is emotional or physical abuse. Emotional abuse consists of things like put downs, name calling, not the kind of criticism that is very common according to researcher John Gottman. Many couples get into bad interactions where one partner is critical of the other. That's not uncommon in distressed relationships. It's one of the most common patterns, again. We're not talking about that. We're talking about criticism. It's really about tearing somebody's ego down. Worse, another form of emotional abuse that can take place when somebody is extremely manipulative. I'm going to get into that as one of the stop signs. But in other words, when they're malignant narcissists, who I described earlier, is something called gaslighting. And this is a very insidious form of emotional abuse, because what the form it takes is, this is the partner who, when you feel like something is wrong, when you know something is up, they try to convince you that you're not seeing reality clearly. Maybe you're just being paranoid. You're seeing things that aren't really there. That receipt that you found on the table, oh, that's not what you think it is, even though your gut tells you something different. This is called gaslighting, and it's a form of emotional abuse, and it can be incredibly damaging to our sense of self. It can certainly be damaging to our self-esteem and our confidence. And obviously, physical abuse, if somebody is laying on hands, if somebody is being hurtful, if somebody is making you feel physically unsafe. If you see those signs and a person is not getting help and is not willing to make changes, it is not safe enough to even try to work on the relationship. As a couples therapist, I don't see couples where there's ongoing emotional or physical abuse. Not all extremely narcissistic people become abusive. Some do. Many with NPD do, but again, not all. Some can just be aloof and insensitive and arrogant, but not overtly abusive. But if you do experience abuse and the person is not getting help and they are not seeking any kind of program to help them stop their abuse, the abuse is 100% on the responsibility of the abuser. It doesn't matter what you say or you don't say. Nobody has a right to respond with abuse. That is a stop sign. And if they won't seek help and if they're not trying, you really need to get professional help yourself to consider what your next steps are, which, you know, in most cases, when I'm working with someone, I try to help them leave if the person is not actually making those changes. The second stop sign is denial. I hinted at this in the first stop sign, but if you're with somebody who's struggling with alcoholism or unhealthy narcissism or any problem, if they can't even acknowledge it, if they can't recognize it, it's not going to change. There are people who have narcissistic personality disorder even. They come to my practice. I see them. I've seen them over the years. I've helped many who recognize that there's something wrong. If your partner, friend, loved one can't at least say, I think I'm in trouble, I think there's something going on here, then again, that's a stop sign. In fact, in the research, denial was one of the worst predictors of unhealthy narcissism. People who use denial throughout their life over time, when they were kids and then when they were teens and then when they were young adults, turned out to show some of the nastiest signs of narcissism. So denial is a terrible sign. And the third stop sign is psychopathy, a cold, remorseless pattern of lies and manipulation. Obviously, someone who gaslights is showing signs of psychopathy. And there is evidence, neuroimaging evidence, that people high in psychopathy do not experience feelings in the same way. And unlike someone who is just struggling with unhealthy narcissism, who we know from the research is blocked in empathy, it's their preoccupation with their own needs or their own vulnerabilities that they can't fully experience and bring to you and express, that keeps them from being able to see the world or hear the world that you're describing from your point of view, that blocks their empathy. Unlike people who only have unhealthy narcissism, people who struggle with psychopathy may not experience empathy at all. They have true, genuine, and maybe neurologically based empathy blocks. And I have very little hope for a relationship where there are signs of psychopathy. If you see any of these three signs, you need to get help figuring out what your next steps are.